Since the Equifax breach was disclosed to the public in early September, Equifax has actually provided us with a lot of very specific details about what actually happened. And in the middle of September, they actually mentioned what the specific vulnerability was exploited in order to obtain the records and social security numbers of 143 million Americans. And so that vulnerability is known as CVE 2017-5638. And it's an Apache Struts vulnerability, which we already knew. And it's from early March. And so what happens is the vulnerability deals with how content type headers are dealt with in the Apache Struts application. So what is a content type header? It's basically an HTTP header, and you can think of HTTP headers as basically metadata that will be sent to the server along with the actual data you're submitting. So if you go to google.com, it'll submit the user agent as a HTTP header, and the user agent is just your browser, Firefox, Chrome, Opera. It'll also maybe include your session cookie, so a session cookie actually might be submitted as an HTTP header. And now the content type HTTP header just provides some information about what actual data is in that HTTP request. So for example, if you're submitting a form, it'll be, form data. If you're uploading a video, it might be, multi-part, or it might be, application/JSON, or it could be, MP4. There's a lot of different MIME types it could be. However, if you construct the content type header in such a way that you will cause an error, that content type header can actually be evaluated as Java code. And so the common exploit that's out currently will basically create a content type header that is, Java code, and it targets the OGNL object graph navigation library, and it basically creates a OGNL object and will wrap that around a command, a system command, a typical command you can execute in a terminal or a shell, and that will be evaluated when an exception is thrown. So we've gone ahead and set up an environment, an intentionally vulnerable environment running Tomcat and Apache Struts with a vulnerable version of Apache Struts. So we'll demonstrate how you can actually go about exploiting this vulnerability, and then we'll talk about some of the ways you can protect yourself. So we've gone ahead and set up an intentionally vulnerable environment. And the environment consists of an Ubuntu 16.04 virtual machine running in VirtualBox, and it's running a Tomcat 8 web server, which has a few Apache Struts applications running on it, and these applications have an intentionally vulnerable version of Apache Struts. And we'll actually make this VM publicly available when this video is posted, so you can actually go to our GitHub at github.com/evolvesecurity and download this VM, spin it up, and test this yourself. So let's look at the actual exploit we're going to be using for this test. And the exploit we found was just from the exploit database, exploit-db.com, and it's just a Python script that takes two parameters, a URL and a command, and it wraps that command in some Java code and then sends it to your URL and attaches your payload as your content type header, as we previously discussed. So I'm just going to show you the web server running so I can make sure that it's up and we'll receive our request. And here's our Tomcat server running. So I'm going to go to Manager, and these are all of our Apache Struts applications we currently have on this web server. So I'm going to click on HTTP-session, and I'm going to click on Hello World, and this will be the URL that we're actually targeting for this exploit. So I'm going to jump over to this screen, and I have two terminals up. On the right, I'm going to open a Netcat listener, and I'm going to listen for a connection. And I'm doing this with the intention of injecting a Netcat command into the server and having that command connect back to my listener. And this is an easy way to verify that your actual command was executed. And because we're running Ubuntu 16.04, we know that Netcat is actually installed so that this command should work. So I'm going to spin up this listener, and I'm going to listen on port 5555. Now if you look at this folder, I have one file. It's just called exploit.py, which is the same exploit from the exploit database. So I'm going to type Python exploit.py, And the first parameter is the URL that we're targeting. So I'm going to type in the IP, and then it's on port 8080, and then I'm going to do the URL path http session / hello.action. And then the second parameter will be a command that we're going to actually inject and wrap around that Java code. So I'm going to do netcat my IP 10.6.6.85. You can see that these two machines, the server and this Kali instance, are on the same network. So I'm just going to connect back to me, and I'm going to connect on port 5555. So if I run this and it works, we'll see a connection on the right that was made from the server that we're targeting. So I'm going to click enter, and there you go. You can see on the right that a netcat connection has been made from the IP 10.6.6.38. And so we can confirm that this vulnerability is actually working, or this exploit is actually working. And we can inject, we can play around and inject different commands. A good idea would be to maybe inject a reverse shell as a command, and then have it connect back to us, and then we could actually have a shell to play around with. So yeah, that is our demonstration of this particular exploit, and how you can use this exploit to target Apache struts. And so as we've seen, these types of vulnerabilities are relatively trivial to exploit. When a vulnerability is disclosed to the public, an exploit is readily available not long after. And so if you want to avoid what happened to Equifax happening to you, you need to keep your systems and your software up to date, and there's many different package managers that help you do this. It's very important to incorporate this update and patching process into your development lifecycle and how you manage these systems and programs and servers you're running. So if you keep your servers, your systems, and your applications up to date, you will be protected from the latest publicly available exploits and protected from the vulnerabilities associated with them.